So in this video we're going to show you how to replace the controller of the e-scooter. The controller of the e-scooter is basically the brain of the operation. It's like the central processing unit, if you like. The power goes into it, the throttle response goes into it, the brake response goes into it, and it decides what action to take. So here I've already undone all 13 bolts because we don't want to have you watching that every single time. So we're just going to take the deck off again and away we go. So the controller is labeled controller, bolted on at the front here to the deck with anti-vibration plates, and as you can see, a lot of wires around this area. Before touching the controller, what we're going to go ahead and do again is remove the battery, just to check there's no power going through the system as we play around with the wires inside. So I've now unscrewed all 4 bolts that retain the battery in place. If you're unsure about removing the battery, then please do see my previous video. So we can now go ahead and lift the battery out carefully. Then unclip the battery again, as so. And then we know there is no power in the system whatsoever. So now the battery is safely removed. Before I unscrew the controller itself, I'm just going to pop a little label onto the battery connections, because when we disconnect the controller there'll be quite a few connections there, just so it's easier to remember which ones to do. Just a handy little tip, you don't have to by any stretch, but if you are a little forgetful like myself, it just helps you. So the controller here is bolted to the deck itself with 2 screws, which we're now just going to undo like so. Again, recommend using magnetic tools so that the screws don't fall inside. So then we can remove the controller. Obviously be careful not to damage any wiring as you do so, and you'll see a lot of wires coming out of it. As I say, this is the brain of the scooter itself, which is why everything goes in or out of here. As you can see, all points on the controller are sealed, which helps with its waterproof rating should any water ever get inside the deck itself. You've got 4 other connections, which are for the motor itself, the LCD display on the handlebars, the speed regulator, and then the brake light itself on the rear mudguard there. So now we're going to go ahead and disconnect the controller itself. We've got 5 different connections to unplug. 1, 2, some of them have got the electrical isolation tape on them. 3. This is 1, but there's 3 parts to it. 1, 2, 3, and then the final one here. And there is our controller. So if this was saying it was faulty in the app and you needed to replace it, that is how to take it out. So now we're going to go ahead and put the controller back in, pretending that we've swapped it out for one that worked. Obviously it worked in the first place in this scenario. So what we're going to do is just reconnect all 5 connections first of all, before we then put the battery back in place or screw the controller back down. So carefully put each connection back exactly as it was before. If it had the electrical tape around it, put it back on it, like so. So with the controller where it needs to be, just line up the screw holes there so you can see it. Make sure that you can easily get to the cables required, and make sure they're not going to stop you from putting the cover back on. So we're going to go ahead now and put the screws back into the deck, bolting the controller back in place. Remember to make sure that as you bolt it down, you're not crimping any cables whatsoever. Again, magnetic tools will make your life 10 times easier. Right, the controller is now screwed back onto the deck. We can make sure that the covering can go back in place without affecting any wires. We can tuck these wires back in nicely so that the battery is available to go back in and be reconnected. So let's go ahead and do that now. So battery back in place. Let's pop it in. Again, make sure not to crimp any wires or cover any wires accidentally. Then we're going to go ahead and plug it in to make sure it works just like before, before we bolt it into place, or you have to unbolt it again to change it. So we're going to plug that back in now. There we go, and try and turn it on to check that it works okay. And as you can see, it does. Good news. We can even do another step if we wished, to check that it works without putting it all back together. through the app, put it to the mode where you do not need to push off, and then just press the throttle to check that the wheel spins. But I'm very confident this is going to work fine. So then we just need to go ahead and put the deck board back into place. But before doing so, just as a safety measure, don't forget to turn the scooter back off again. Okay, so then we're in a position to put the deck cover back on. So now we can go ahead and put the cover back in place to ensure it's all nice and waterproof and safe. And that is how to replace the controller.